today. So today you get the B team in the pulpit. I was honored that Pastor Whitaker asked me to fill in for her today. So our prayers are with her and with other members that are with her down in D.C. as she lifts up her voice among other voices for justice. So let us pray. God, before we even entered here, you were already here. We pray that we may open our hearts, our souls, and our minds to the words, to the music, to the silence, to the fellowship. Move us, strengthen us, enliven us, and help us to be committed anew. We offer this in Jesus' name. Amen. So the story of police violence and unarmed black people is a story about fear. But it's a fear that is deeply experienced on many sides. On September 25th, 2012, the New York City Police Department, in full tactical gear, assaulted the residence of Mohammed Ba, a student from Guinea, West Africa, and without warrant and probable cause, they fired 8 bullets, killing him. In 1999, I remember standing in the vestibule 1 week after he was shot, where Amadou Diallo saw 41 bullets, 19 of which caused his death. There's a fear of police on the part of many black men and women that you can be in your home. You can even be driving away from harm's way, like 15-year-old Jordan Edwards in Texas, and still get shot and killed. My wife Kim and I worry when James forgets to text us when he's coming home from Brooklyn during the summer from baseball practice at 8 o'clock at night. The fear becomes more intense when you actually see the physical harm being done on video, such as Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, and yet police officers are still acquitted. There's fear and there's frustration in that there seems to be no consequence for actions. The good news this week is that on Tuesday, the family of Mohammed Ba was awarded $2.21 million for his wrongful death, though it took having to go the route of having his civil rights violated in order for that to happen. There is also fear on the part of police officers. Let us be crystal clear. Being a police officer is a dangerous job. Frontline officers serve in a multiplicity of roles, from social worker to mediator, enforcer to crime deterrent. If some of you actually sat, I wonder if Marietta, our fellow member who's a retired police officer, I imagine the stories she could tell that illustrate this fact. Police officers that I know have a strong sense of duty, a deep desire to do the right thing, and are often running towards trouble when others are running away. They understand the complexity of their profession and oftentimes feel misunderstood. Fear is a regular part of their lives, yet their sense of fear is heightened by firearms and assault rifles that flood our streets, and dispute resolution that seems to have taken on a shoot first, ask questions later approach. Compound this by the pernicious ways that racism shapes public opinion and law enforcement in ways that demonizes people of color as being more prone to violence. And you have the killing of police officers in 2015, 2017, like Officer Familia and Officer Moore, who have families, and they were just doing their jobs. I worked closely with law enforcement in East Harlem during the height of the crack epidemic in the 80s. I've not been called to be a police officer. I do not envy the job that they do. But let us be clear. There's enough fear to go around. So what happens to us when we are afraid? So I posed this question to the Wednesday night God Talk group this past week. Let us be known, it is the greatest Bible study ever. The next one is on November 29th. And some of the answers that we shared with each other was that you get physically sick. There's anxiety, there's disappointment, there's helplessness, there's paralysis. You can almost feel the blood rush through your body when you are afraid. There's also sometimes this adrenaline rush in fear, this sense of feeling alive. We noted some folks that are even addicted to this adrenaline rush. Note the extreme sports athletes, and others who thrive in chaos. But the reality is that fear does not bring out our best selves. And generally, it's an inhibitor and a barrier to being our best selves. So the relationship between police violence and unarmed black communities is the case study of how fear can feed fear and just continually ramps up harming everybody in the process. When we have communities of color who are not at their best and eventually at their worst, when we have police officers not at their best and eventually at their worst, fear does not eradicate fear. It just causes more fear. Our challenge today is that fear has become normalized. So I have a confession to make this morning. I do not like the scriptures that we read today. I don't like them. If I had it my way, I would ignore these scriptures, I'd pass over them, and we just wouldn't deal with them. The parable of the talents is always, this is why the first one that Mel read, is always particularly disturbing at times to me, because it's oftentimes used to undergird, the prosperity gospel. Those folks, that theology that says, well, if you do the right things and actions, God will kind of compensate you. And what's built into that, if you don't, you lose. You are not compensated. You are in trouble. Passages like these sometimes make it fearful, or others fearful to be Christians. So as we heard from Pastor Whitaker last week, when these stories were told and eventually written, there was a strong sense that the reign of God was right around the corner. It was important to get your house in order. And these are the cries of oppressed people who are hungry for hope. They're looking for the oppressors to be taken down and eradicated. So I want to propose that we suspend the immediacy of this and the judgment. And I want us to look more closely at the passage in Matthew for a second. I want to specifically look at the third servant. So in the parable, the master returns, the third servant says, Master, I knew you to be a hard man. You reap where you have not sown, you gather where you have not scattered, so I was afraid. And I went and I hid your gold in the ground. The master then responds, you worthless, lazy servant, then you ought to put my money on deposit, or on my return I would have gotten it back with an interest. So I don't know about you, but I always growing up empathized with the third servant. Hey, there's nothing wrong with trying to make sure that I just want to play it safe. I want to put it in the ground, and I will not have lost it. But there are two things I want us to look closely at. I want to propose that the third servant was afraid and was passive. He was afraid to make a mistake, so he put it in the ground. He was passive in that he decided not to have any active relationship with this money. He put it in a hole and didn't return until the master came back. His fear and passiveness led him to not even consider putting it in the bank. His fear and passiveness stifled his creativity and initiative. His fear and passiveness gave over any sense of his own personhood and power in his relationship to the master. He even justifies this, notice, by even blaming the master. See, I know that you're a hard man. You reap where you not sow, you gather where you're not scattered. You know, it's really your fault that I've actually put it in the ground. His fear and passiveness has caused a paralysis. Let me just put in the money in the hole. His default, I want to propose, was his fear and his passiveness. The first two servants, they actually had a sense of who their master is, and they seemed tuned in enough into the relationship. And being trusted with the gold was an opportunity to deepen that relationship. It was an opportunity for their own creativity and initiative. It was also an opportunity for them to fail. They too could have failed, but they weren't really afraid to fail, or if they were afraid to fail, they didn't allow it to paralyze them when they took the chance. The third servant allowed the fear to get the better of him. All right, so whether you're fully with me or not on this, let me assure you that we were not of all of one mind last Wednesday. And I've asked them to be quiet. But what we can agree on is that fear can paralyze us. Fear can stop us from being our best selves. Fear stifles our creativity and initiative and makes us even more afraid to take chances in fear of failing. Fear wants us to dig a hole and walk away. Fear wants us not to put ourselves on the line. Fear wants us to shrink into the background. Fear wants us to believe that the problems are too complex, they're too overwhelming. We're never going to make any impact on the Jones Act. We're never going to do anything against this unpetitionable government. Let me suggest that fear may indeed be winning the battle in some of the segments of our society, but I am not willing to concede the war. God is calling us to break the cycle of fear. So what's it going to take? Well, first off, we have to name the fact and own that fear exists, and recognize that it is paralyzing us at moments. Now, you have to acknowledge that fear is there. Those that are in 12-step programs, those who are mental health professionals, they know, they say that you can't begin the process of healing and repair if you don't acknowledge that it's there. If we don't acknowledge that we're afraid, that we don't acknowledge that the fear exists and that it is paralyzing us. And we have to avoid the temptation to blame others for fear's existence. So notice the third servant wants to blame the master. Well, I know you're a hard man, but that's why I did this. So you actually made me be afraid. We have to acknowledge that fear exists, and we have to refuse to let it have power over us. This is no small step because we have become deeply invested in fear-based narratives that we have developed. They help us make sense out of senselessness. They are prone to violence. We've created strategies as a society based on these narratives as a way to somehow protect ourselves. So stand your ground laws. Those are based in fear. The increased militarization of police forces. Fear. Training our young black and brown boys what you should do when you are stopped by a police officer. That's fear. Body cameras on police officers. That's fear. Fear has become acceptable. It has become our friend. And it's become normalized. So first we've got to name it. That was a good. We've got to name it, and we cannot allow it to have power over us. Secondly, we have to unleash our creativity and initiative. Now, there is no recipe that I'm going to lay out for you in terms of specific strategies, but there are some stories that can inspire and instruct. I have a colleague who's a pastor in Prince George's County. He's actually one of James's godfathers, who's been part of a group for the last 10 years of law enforcement working with local clergy and local community. And PG County was one of the places where there were very high incidences of police shooting of unarmed black people. That has almost disappeared. But it's taken a commitment from local leaders, from law enforcement, from the judicial system, and a sense of both police accountability as well as community accountability. But it was they're willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and to be able to do this together. It can be done. I was inspired by watching I'm a fan of Real Sports, Brian Gumbel, and he did a piece on police officers who actually started these football leagues in South Central. But what he was trying to do was put a face of police officers for these young people and to be present within their lives. Attempts to actually build real relationships. There's actually now policies. I don't know if you knew this. So about 15 years ago, if you were a formerly incarcerated person in many states, you couldn't even get a barber's license. Some of those policies are changing. Not too long ago, Pastor Whitaker talked about the Take a Knee movement that's happening in the National Football League. Can you imagine the courage it takes NFL players to take a knee in the national anthem? I admire those that have taken such public stands because it could cost them their careers. For those of you who are familiar, you know Colin Kaepernick does not have a job right now. And it takes a tremendous amount of moral courage to take a knee on a Sunday afternoon in front of a stadium full of people, the majority of whom are pretty pissed off at you for doing that. Creativity, initiative, courage. The third thing that I want to propose to you is what it's going to take to break the cycle of fear is we've got to act like we are children of light. We have to act like it. So in 1 Thessalonians, what Devorah read, while they are saying all is peaceful and all secure, destruction is upon them, but you, friends, are not in the dark. We must not sleep like the rest, but are awake. You are children of light, children of day, armed with the breastplate of faith and love. Therefore, encourage one another, build one another up, indeed, as you do. We are children of light. Put on the breastplate of love, build one another up. What if we actually saw everybody as a child of light? What if we found ways for those of us caught in the vice grip of fear, including ourselves, to start seeing and treating everyone as a child of light? What if we saw our job as building one another up versus engaging each other as if we were inherently evil? Watch our words sometimes. You know, how we want to demonize those who don't agree with us. But what if we were actually, I know this is a hard one, but what if we actually saw 45 as a child of light? Now there's a hard one for you. One of the reasons, the thing that I have really marveled at being here for the last 7 or 8 years at Fort Washington, is through all of the challenges that we've gone through, this church has grown. People were showing up. You know why they were showing up? Because we were treating each other as children of light. And when people see that, they say, I want to be a part of that. I don't want that. I can let go of that because I want to be a part of that. I want to be there. What if we actually acted that way, not just here in the church? In the places where we work, the places where we socialize, the other places within our lives. As people of faith, we cannot succumb to fear, but we have to live as children of light, and all the complexity of what that is. One of my favorite book titles is that of the second book by liberationist theologian Gustavo Gutierrez. It's entitled, We Drink from Our Own Wells. The answers to what we can do are already here in this community. They're actually here in this building. They're actually here in the pews. God was here before we arrived. We just now have to open ourselves up to the present so as to unleash our creativity and initiative that can indeed change the world. Our ideas, ourselves, and our actions. As people of faith, God mandates us to break the cycle of fear. Jesus tells us, and Jesus shows us, fear does not have the last word. Fear does not have the last word. Fear does not have the last word. Love us.